All right, this is part 3 of our lesson today, a part that was left out of the recording, so I am including it here. It will be different from the original, first of all, because I can't remember exactly what I left out without going back and watching the recording, which takes more time than I want. And also because I think I can do this more succinctly. And also I've discovered some information that I didn't include in the first, in our class period together. Let me share the screen first and look at the sentence, which you were required to do. You were in 2 groups working together during the first and only breakout session. You were to do a sentence with 2 nouns, 1 verb form in the imperfect tense, and 1 adjective. And the sentence that was formed, let me see. I should be able to zoom this in. Oh, that's 200%. Let's go up to. Here we are. Okay, we have the 2 nouns, ha Petros, kai ho Daoid. We said that we probably shouldn't add hoi kaloi, because the Greek then becomes rather strange. There is no hoi apostoloi, for example. If we had hoi apostoloi, then hoi kaloi would make more sense. But I don't think in the New Testament we find this kind of construction where we have 2 separate nouns and then we have them described with hoi. We have a ha and a ha, and then we put them together and make a hoi. So what I've done here to correct this even more than I did in class was to have ha Petros, kai ho Daoid. You did a good job putting the 2 nouns, and the 1 adjective. Now we need the verb form in the imperfect tense. One way would be to use a verb like ap erchomai, and you notice that the augment comes here. The epsilon lengthens to eta. Ap erch on ta is the deponent, is the middle passive, chapter 22.2, like dechomai, imperfect form. So the augment plus the endings that pertain to the deponent verbs. Peter and David are good men, and they were approaching. If I wanted to put they were approaching, actually, I would need to put kai here. Kai up erchon. Oh, on top. Okay. I didn't see the on top. I just saw up erchon and thought, what? It changed. Or if we leave off the second part, they were approaching, or they began to approach. And don't forget that the imperfect can have 2 different meanings. And if you have an imperfect form by itself, you need to give both possible meanings. What we ended up with, though, I think in class, was Peter and David were being, good English would simply be were good men, imperfect, and the imperfect of were, according to chapter 22 and section 22.5, the imperfect of a me, 3rd person plural, Peter and David is ason, were good. And I think in Greek, we would have to supply a noun, and that the one that we know is anthropoi, kaloi anthropoi. Peter and David were good men, kaloi anthropoi. In this case, I think in Greek, we would not have articles with good men. It's just simply a word describing these two men. So I think that's the way that we would do this sentence in the Greek New Testament, in Koine Greek. And here I supplied the verb ap erchomai in order to, and then made it into an imperfect form by placing the augment here, lengthening this vowel, and putting the endings of the imperfect on the deponent verb. Now, the other thing that I need to add, in case you're watching this and you want to have more information, the reason that we're having problems, I discovered, with the augment in the imperfect is because I didn't take care of something. And because my electronic version of the textbook isn't working, I'm going to refer you to your textbook and ask you to turn to page 112. Now, this is under the aorist tense. And having not done this experiment before, I didn't realize that we were missing something in chapter 22, and that is the understanding we get in section 12.2.5. It's on page 112 of your textbook. It's in the aorist tense. And because we had that in previous classes, we didn't do the imperfect until Greek 3. We already knew this, and we didn't have trouble with it, but we had trouble in this class because we hadn't had the aorist tense. If you notice, 12.2.5 says compound verbs, and that's what we call verbs that begin with a preposition. And he says some of these verbs that have already been met in vocabulary list are actually compounds of a preposition plus another verb. For example, apoluo is apo plus luo. I send away, apoluo. The aorist of these verbs are formed as though the aorist of the verb was formed first and the preposition was tacked on afterwards. And I think we could say the same for the imperfect tense. So if we put it this way, the imperfect tense of these verbs, the imperfect forms of these verbs, is formed as though the imperfect of the verb was put first, and then the preposition was added on, and the omicron of apo drops off. With many prepositions like epi, the iota drops off. With apo, the omicron drops off. He says the omicron of apo disappears, although that should not be a surprise, as the same phenomenon. The same thing has been met already with verbs such as ap erchomai. It's not apo erchomai, it's simply ap erchomai. And so then the imperfect is ap erchomin. So omicron and epsilon don't contract. You form with a compound verb, you form the imperfect as though the verb were not compound. You just take the erchomai, lengthen it to erchomai with eta, and then add the ap. He was, or I was departing, or I began to depart, or they were departing, they began to depart. No, sorry. That's not true of the middle passive endings. We don't have that. We have it with the active endings, on, es, in, amen, eta, on, but we don't have that with amen, u, eta, amatha, esta, anta. So, Amen, up, Amen, I was departing. I began to depart. And if you check section 12.2.5, and instead of the words aorist, if you just substitute the words imperfect, I think you will have the explanation that you need in order to understand how the augment is added to compound verbs. I think that should do it. The parts that we're missing, and we'll close.